is this weekend, so I hope nobody's superstitious. Well, today we're talking about what is called the theory of change, impact management model and framework. And the reason we wanted to talk about this is because whenever anyone is trying to steer or generate on impact, we need something to keep that logic in place. And that is what Anita and Charlotte are going to talk with us about today. It's something that is frequently discussed, but I have this feeling that very few people actually know what it is all about. So we are so lucky to have Anita and Charlotte, who are the theory of change gurus, so I hear. So really looking forward to hearing from them. I can pass over to you both, Charlotte and Anita.
Thank you. Let me just figure out how to, because my slides are in Google Slides, so I may not be able to do the full screen view, but let's see how this looks for you and whether you can actually see this.
Yeah.
Share screen. So you can see my screen now?
I can.
Yes, and what happens if I do this?
So far, so good.
Yeah?
Perfect.
Okay, that's probably better. Okay, great. Okay, so perhaps a very quick introduction, or not necessary, Andrea. I'm not sure if you've already done it for us while we were getting into the meeting.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah.
I'd love to.
Okay. So my name is Charlotte Soedjak, and I work for the Akvo Foundation here in Amsterdam. And I work as a planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning specialist there. And also Anita, my colleague, is in the call. So perhaps Anita, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Thanks, Charlotte. Planning, monitoring, evaluation, learning advisor, and mainly focusing on the very first part of that, the design of a program with theories of change, and on learning. I've been with Akvo for 5 years now, and before that, elsewhere.
Thanks. So today, you've asked us to tell a bit more about theories of change. Apparently, we understand from you that's a topic that is being talked about a lot, and perhaps also used already a bit in the impact investment sector, how to call it. So, well, we both work in the development cooperation sector, so it's a bit different in terms of scope, but it's also the sector where I believe the theory of change methodology originates from. So perhaps we can share some things today about how we apply it and a bit about the methodology itself. Let me try to get to the next slide. So perhaps a very quick introduction about Akvo. So we are actually a global not-for-profit, and we offer a data platform, but also consultancy services to organizations in what we refer to as the data journey. That's also the picture that you see. And basically services focus on supporting theory of change development at the very start of that data journey, but also monitoring framework, data collection, analysis, but also understanding and using data for decision making. To become more effective in the work that organizations do, and to have a bigger and more inclusive and sustainable impact. So that's very, in short, the data journey. It's actually also the Akvo theory of change in a visual. And the theory of change itself sits very much in the design phase. So very much in that very first part of the data journey. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so here is a picture that my colleague drew, and I think it's a nice one because it really represents the reality. Often is that projects have often very ambitious impact that they want to contribute to, but what happens in the middle, right? You first need to unravel that miracle, so you need to figure out how to get there. And how are you going to contribute to that change? So a TUC is a useful tool to help you get there. So what is the theory of change? So basically, sorry for the text heavy slides, but we figured since it's also being recorded, it's nice to be able to look back at this. It's basically a picture of the future. So it shows the intended change that you want to contribute to as a project or organization. And it usually consists of several pathways of change. It shows how strategies, so strategies we see as a collection of project activities, how strategies lead to intended outcomes. And the outcomes are really the change at the level of stakeholders. So they're improvements as a result of your strategies. And then how these outcomes contribute to the intended impact. And the impact is really the improvements at the level of beneficiaries. So the TUC has at least two components. First, there is a diagram, which consists of pathways of change. And there is also a narrative. So it consists of the causal assumptions that explain why you believe that if X happens, then Y happens because of Z. A diagram, a narrative, and we also like to think of a third component, and it's the step where you really visualize a theory of change to make it more communicable and easier to understand. But really, those first two are, from a methodological point of view, what a TUC are. So then some examples. Here, so you see lots of blocks. You don't need to read it, but this is an example of the Akvo Theory of change. So in blue, you see the strategies, and then in green, there are the intended outcomes, and then in pink, the impact. And that's usually how the TUC is shown in a diagram. And here's another example of a program that we're partnering in, of Watershed. And also here you see on the left, the strategies, and then in the middle, the outcomes, and then the impact on the far right. So that's really like, this is really the diagram as I referred to earlier. And then there is also the narrative, which is, in this quick intro, not so interesting to show you because it's just text, but just so you know. Then, why make a theory of change? A TUC process helps you get an understanding of the project context. So to get an understanding of the bigger picture before diving into the scope of the program. It's also a participatory process in which all relevant stakeholders discuss and agree. So this helps to create alignment between the different project partners about how they expect strategies lead to outcomes and how they contribute to impact. It helps you demonstrate how you expect change will happen and how you contribute to that change. It helps you understand what needs to be done, so what activities, to make the expected outcomes happen. And also, a TUC is used to reflect on regularly, like for instance, every year, and to learn and adjust planning. So it helps you discover the unknowns and uncertainties and adjust. So it's like a cycle. And then it's also very useful to decide what results you need to monitor. And it's the next step after having a theory of change in place would be to formulate your indicators in a structured way. And then I believe this is probably the last slide before you think, oh, this is taking too long. So this is these are basically the steps, the process for building a theory of change. So you start at the left bottom here, the context analysis, actor analysis, so what stakeholders are there in the project, but also all the relevant stakeholders that the project may have effect on. A factor analysis is more what are the problems and the challenges, perhaps also opportunities that are there. And together they are the context analysis. And then when you've finished your context analysis, you can really start building the theory of change. So you start with defining your impact and your strategies. And then the next step is to go to the expected outcomes, formulate those. Then you go to the cause-effect relations. How, in what order do the outcomes happen? And then you need to start making the causal assumptions, because sometimes the steps are a bit big to take. So you need to explain why you assume a certain change will happen. And that's really when it's finished, and then you can start using a theory of change to point what outcomes you need to monitor. You can start formulating indicators, and also you can start to plan your activities. So I think, that was a very quick introduction of the methodology, at least. But rather than just sending information, perhaps it's nice to answer some questions as well.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, this was really a great overview. So thank you very much for that, Charlotte. Certainly some questions pop up from this. And one thing that you triggered me was you said something, it's a picture of the future. And I was curious, from your perspective, from your experience, how tangible, how detailed do those pictures of the future need to be? Because it looked almost like a vision in a way at that last item you showed. I think it was that all people have access to wash. And that's quite a grand vision. So it wasn't this one, it was one of your example, the wash. Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
So that yellow one there. So universal access, that's quite big. So I was curious on what that looks like for you, or if that needs to be assessed.
I'm letting Anita answer this one.
Yeah, I'll make a start.
Been heavily involved, yeah.
So this is one I worked on. So universal access to sustainable wash services is actually something that in this program, that's like the faraway impact that all of us were trying to contribute to.
Yeah.
We didn't monitor it. We did not have a baseline. We didn't monitor it. We are not evaluating it. This program was focused on achieving the outcomes. This is one of the strategic partnerships of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a dialogue and dissent program. So the focus was on building capacities of civil society organizations to become better at evidence-based lobby and advocacy, so that they could advocate to the duty bearers in the countries, and those duty bearers, mainly the government, would then ensure that they contribute to universal access to sustainable wash services. So, but there are, of course, also programs where you do want to monitor impact. But the important thing of having such a theory of change when we talk about impact and outcomes is that these outcomes are the missing middle, which not everybody is always aware of, that you can't just do a lot of things and then impact will happen. Unless you are you implement a water and sanitation program yourself, that you pay people to dig wells or to build latrines, sure, then you can have quick impact. It's usually not so big because it's just you doing things. You would like local actors to do things instead of you doing it. So it's not very big. It's also usually not very locally owned. You want local people to be able to think about what type of water system, what type of sanitation, or whatever you're working on. So theories of change show you or help you to think about what needs to happen in that area, of which local actors need to do what differently to make that impact happen. I'm not sure I'm answering your question. How tangible and detailed? Yeah, so the outcomes when we facilitate such a process with an organization to make a theory of change, we can go quite deep into detail because that's where the devil is. If we leave it abstract and general, then it'll be more difficult when you want to implement such a program. It'll be more difficult to agree on exactly what was this and what do we need to do to make it happen. but also exactly how are we going to monitor it if you choose to monitor it. So yeah, there's a level of detail that you need to go into, but of course there's a balance because you can't predict the future. You shouldn't spend too much time on predicting the future either. You have to get some real work done.
Yeah, excellent. And what immediately I pop up with next would be, so when we're looking at the theory of change and impact investing, most often they do have indicators already baked in. That is not something you guys have here. So I was curious on what, because Charlotte, you said that's kind of the next step. Yeah, what's your take on that? Where do indicators help you in this process?
Shall I answer, Anita?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, indeed. In the way we support projects, the theory of change comes first, ideally, and then you start looking at what indicators are there. But in practice, this is not always the order that's followed. But if you have the opportunity to do it in this order, it's best, because it helps. Yeah, if you first have a theory of change in place, and you have well, you're still looking at that diagram of the watershed TOC, and you know what outcomes you want to achieve, and that lead to that impact, then you can also much easier point or see, okay, so what are the most important outcomes? Perhaps they are the ones that have lots of arrows leading to it or leading from it. So that diagram already tells you a bit about what may be important outcomes in your project, and they are obviously the ones that you also want to monitor. And there are a few other things as well to take into account, but this is an important first step, and why we like to first have the TOC and then look at the indicators.
Yeah, and maybe also to add to that, we have quite some partners who want our help to collect data to monitor indicators, but then we always explain to them, it's not so useful to just have a list of indicators. You want to first know what you want to achieve, and then we can look at what of this needs to be monitored and how, and some will be monitored with indicators, and that it's not the other way around. But you could, of course, also, when you have a theory of change pretty detailed with a lot of concrete intended outcomes, you could stick the indicators. You could decide which to monitor and then stick indicators next to that. Yeah. We would say we don't want to monitor indicators. We want to monitor progress on intended outcomes or impact, and we use indicators for that.
Yeah, that's clear. Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. So a couple other questions. One was, on your opinion, what to you, from your experience, defines a good theory of change, a well, thorough, defined theory of change versus one that is, let's say, a bit, not so clear in where things want to go?
Sure. Maybe we have a...
We even have a slide on that.
I have a slide on this one, yeah. Like, yeah, so again, very text heavy.
Yeah, this is really very detailed, like a checklist. But at a higher level, we could say that a good theory of change needs to be developed in a participatory way, but you might not see that if you see the picture and the text. It needs to be concrete, and that's what this is about, actually. So let's see. Yeah, without going into all the details, if I see a picture of a theory of change, what I look at is there an impact, something far away? And that doesn't need to be incredibly specific. I don't need an indicator there yet. Are there some type of strategy, something that organization or the program is going to be doing? And is there a lot of space for outcomes, for intended outcomes? If there's hardly any space for outcomes, it can be like this or like that. I like to make them like this because a wall is really wide and you can keep going on forever. But now we work on murals, so who cares? It can go in any direction. But if there's not a lot of space at outcome, a lot of space for the outcomes, then that's the first point that I see that's probably not going to be a useful theory of change. And then if those outcomes are vague, like, vague, improved enabling environment, then it's hard to see what do you need to do to make that happen and how are you going to monitor it. So I also look for concrete intended outcomes. Who is doing what differently?
Excellent. I have some questions here from the audience that I think we can start diving into. Let's see. So Nuno asks, what are the main challenges that you encounter with your clients when it comes to explaining and exploring outcomes with different stakeholders of a project? Do you ever run into resistance or alignments after discussion and engagement? Yeah, and Nuno, also please feel welcome to open the mic if you would like to elaborate on that at all.
Charlotte, would you like to answer that question?
So challenges with supporting with TOC processes. I can't see the question because I'm not sure where the chat box is going. Here, I should be able to find it back somewhere. Yeah, here it is. Here we go.
The challenges with clients. I can also make a start and you can add.
Yeah.
So there's always challenges. There's one challenge, for example, is when a donor wants a theory of change, and then that organization will want a theory of change because the donor wants it, because it needs to be included in the proposal. And then they don't, apart from that, they don't really intend to do anything with it. They just want to have that picture and there, done. So if that is the case, that's challenging for us because we want them to have a theory of change which is developed in a participatory way. So you generate this co-ownership between the different stakeholders. We want them to use it for planning, for monitoring and for learning. And if it's just a tick box type of thing, then that's probably not going to happen. So that's one of the challenges. Another one is that sometimes if an organization is big, what can happen is that there's a certain team or certain task force in the organization who's working on strategy, and then the M&E people are working on a theory of change, but strategy is already way ahead, and the theory of change sort of has to adjust the theory of change to the strategy, whereas we believe in thinking about strategy in that process of developing a theory of change. That's another challenge. Resistance. Yeah, there's resistance. As soon as there's a whole bunch of little blocks with text, the people who have been involved in the process of developing it, they will not mind a lot of boxes with text because they were the ones saying, yeah, but this isn't clear yet and this isn't included yet. So let's add this, let's add that. But people who were not involved, the more boxes, the more complicated it looks and the more resistance.
You raise an interesting point there. So you were talking about the strategy and the role of this. So where would it make sense for you for the TOC kind of development to be sitting within an organization, for example? Does it need to be part of the strategy, let's say, department, if there is one?
Yeah, I would say so. It now sits, well, it's often seen as a monitoring evaluation or planning, monitoring, evaluation, learning type of approach or methodology, but it helps an organization or a program to think about, yeah, what needs to be done. Well, first to think about what do we want to achieve, and then what are we going to do to make it happen, which I think is typically strategy thinking. And so a theory of change is key for whoever works on strategy in an organization or in a program. So where it has to sit, it needs to sit at the heart of an organization wherever that is.
Yeah.
Maybe a small addition, because also in development projects there's often it's cross country, right? Like there's often organizations, people from different countries involved, and then who is making that TOC? So like for instance with a project like Watershed, I believe it's in 6 or 7 countries the project is being implemented. So in addition to having like an overall program theory of change, it's also important to have like country specific theories of change, because the context there is just very different. And then also to create that ownership and alignment in country. You want to have the projects or the country specific theories of change as well. So, but that depends on the project.
Interesting. A couple more questions here from the audience that I think would be great to dive into. So Lena asks, how do you collect information? And maybe Lena, feel free to open the mic if you wish to elaborate on what kind of information you mean for this one. And then there's another question that is definitely worthwhile to discuss here is, what is the difference between outputs and outcomes? Maybe we can go into that one first.
Yeah, in terms of the data collection, I mean, do you collect information asking a lot of questions to your client, and at the end you receive the information from them, or you go to the market and then there's I don't know, like research, and you use this research? Like, what are the sources for this data collection?
That totally depends what you want to do with that data, or what it's meant to, what you want to use the data for. But so when at the point of theories of change, if I think of data and theories of change, there's some data before the theory of change in the context analysis, and that that totally depends on the program or an organization. That could be secondary data, but that's about context analysis, right? Understanding the problems or the opportunities in the context, knowing who are the actors, who are stakeholders in making the intended impact happen. So that can be all sorts of quantitative and qualitative secondary or primary data. That's before the theory of change. And then when you have your theory of change and you've decided what you want to monitor, then you can think of, okay, so with which indicators are we going to monitor a certain intended outcome or an impact, and with which method are we going to get that information? And especially at impact level, that's where, that's a change at the level of end users, beneficiaries, households. So that's where I would suggest then, if you want to monitor or baseline impact, that you do household surveys. And but that's, so that's another whole other chapter, I would say. But definitely that's also something that Akvo supports partners in, but it's, towards, well, on the other side of the theory of change.
Yeah, and it also, that's maybe a bridge to what's the difference between outputs and outcomes. It depends. Your data collection depends on whether it's an output or an outcome, right? Like the number of trainings provided, for instance, number of farmers trained, or that's really an output, right? It's a direct result of your activity. That's a matter of counting. You don't need to have a survey on that, right? You can keep lists of training participants, those kind of things. But yeah, how to get data on whether you've achieved or a certain outcome, that really depends on what outcome it is, right? But often that's something that you would need to go into a more survey kind of mode to collect data on at a farmer, for instance. But yeah, that really depends on the project as well.
Maybe we can also show that slide about output and outcome definitions.
Yes, yeah, good point. It was here.
Yeah, and these ones are quite notoriously difficult to capture without putting that survey out there to do this direct data collection. which yeah, always is a tricky one, because you also don't want to burden too many of your beneficiaries, etc. So I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I'll just have a look at, shall we just show the difference of what is an output, an outcome, and an impact, where Charlotte already said an output is the direct result of your project activity. I'm saying is and is and is. These are the definitions that we use and that are quite widely used in the international development sector. Of course, these are also words that are used out in the street, and then they might mean something differently. But output, you have control over that. It's just I plan something and I do it, or I pay somebody to do it. There, done. Outcome is I can build capacities of somebody or work with somebody, and then try to steer that organization, that partner, that stakeholder does something differently, like more inclusively or more environmentally sustainable. And but that's another actor who needs to be doing things differently. I don't have control over that. I have influence over it. And then impact is at even a level further. It's these local actors, when they do their work better, like more inclusively or more environmentally sustainable, as an example, then small farmers or end users of water supply systems or whoever, they will benefit. That's what we call impact. The result at that level is impact. Yeah, I don't even have influence over it. I can say I contribute to it. It's in my sphere of interest. I can say I contribute to it, but if I want to show how I contribute to it, or my program, my project, then I would need to monitor a couple of outcomes to show that these changes have happened. And because of these changes, there's an impact over there that might have happened. But there's this whole, this missing middle.
I would love to ask a little question here. So in the context of what we're doing right now in this webinar, see if I'm right. So the output would be like, are we doing it, yes or no? We can count it, one webinar, right?
Yeah.
The outcome could be the people have learned something.
Yeah.
And then the impact could be?
No, that they've learned something and that they do something with it. So the people in this webinar, if you go back to your organizations and you say, well, this is important for us, let's do a theory of change, then that would be an outcome. And then, in this case, is a very big job. We need a lot more outcomes to make the impact happen. Impact could be that the organizations who you work with do. I don't even know where all of you work, but I know some of you. The organizations who you work with in the countries, outside of wherever we are here in the West. I also don't know where we're all based, but that they do their work better, so that poor people or people who are now marginalized or excluded or who don't have access to basic services or have a low income or not a decent job, that at that level there are improvements. That's when we talk about impact.
Okay. Yeah,
away.
Thanks for that. I think it helps me to also think through it. Let's see now. Okay, so Althea asks, would you recommend, if a new strategy is being put in place, that the strategy and that's I think maybe similar to the question that I already asked. So does the TOC and strategy need to be working together? And I think we covered that one. So now let's see.
But whether it's done at organization level or
exactly.
Both. That can be both. Like the example that Charlotte showed of Akvo, that's an organization level theory of change. And the Watershed one is a program level theory of change. And then even under the Watershed program level theory of change, there's a theories of change of the countries.
Interesting.
Country programs, So it's basically, a bunch of people. What do you want to achieve together? And what are you going to do about it? And then make that clear, put that into boxes or write something about it.
Yeah. So what do you, when you're building these TOCs or formulating them with your clients or even for yourself, what are some of the challenges that you run into in potentially these assumptions that you said? That's one step to the next step, or anything else in between?
Yeah,
Yeah, we've already covered some challenges in the previous, but perhaps one more is that often organizations or projects may not realize they actually need a theory of change first, and that they dive right into developing indicators. But yeah, like we've also discussed earlier, is that in order to develop like a good indicator set or monitoring framework that you'll use for more purposes than just reporting, for instance, you want to also use it for decision making, then you would ideally need to first develop a theory of change. So that could be a challenge that we see.
Yeah, another challenge, it takes time and people. So time times a lot of people. So it's it's not something that I can make a theory of change by myself, me and my computer, but that's not a good theory of change. It might look fantastic, but it's mine. So it'll take me forever to get everybody else to feel co-owner. So it's better to involve everybody else from the start. That's the better way. So yeah, it takes time. So money.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
And so you also work on the evaluation and the learning components of this. So what do you see happening there? What does the learning process and the evaluation components look like in practice?
Yeah, so the evaluation is, in our sector, usually we say evaluators, they're external, and external independent people who come and look at our program, and then they will use the theory of change to see what was the intention of this program, what were they, what did they want to achieve, what were they going to be doing, and what has been monitored. And with that monitoring, you can look at, so how far are you in your theory of change, or which changes have you seen happen? So that's usually an external team of people. Watershed, today we're getting our evaluation report of the Watershed program. And I'm sure they'll say something about the theory of change. But ourselves, we use the theory of change for learning in the way that, let's see, various ways. We do yearly monitoring of the outcomes. And then with those findings, we look at the theory of change and see which of these intended outcomes, because we don't monitor impact, but which of the intended outcomes do we see any changes? And how fast is that going, or how inclusive is that? Or sometimes we see that changes happen which are further down the logic and the earlier ones haven't happened yet. So what does that tell us? Does that mean our theory of change is incorrect? Or does it mean we thought, well, yeah, that's the same. Did we think change would happen in a way and it didn't that way? Or maybe we did think it through clearly, and actually that intended outcome still needs to happen. So those type of conversations with the team help us to then think about, okay, for the next year, what are we going to be doing differently? More of this, less of that, involve more stakeholders, or so that's the learning to, that's one way of learning for to adjust your own implementation. And then there's other type of learning, like we have learning trajectories, like teams of people who dive into a topic and really dig that out. And those topics come from the theory of change. The topics which pop out as important in the theory of change. But you can also have like a gap in your theory of change where you don't know, if you have no experience, don't know what will happen next or why something will happen next. And you can put a research team on that. So there's many ways of using it for learning.
Thank you. Yeah, and how, so when you're learning, will the strategy team then need to also be part of that and be part of this sort of absorbing the learnings to re-steer your implementation projects?
Yeah, so in that same Watershed example, I was leading the PME, the Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation team, and my team would join with the management team to, on a yearly or bi-yearly basis, share whatever findings we had and reflect with them. And because then you have more perspectives and more people looking at whatever the data or the information or the whatever graphs or text we had. I can interpret that, but it's much more rich if you involve more people in interpreting the findings. So yeah, I would say that in Watershed, at least the management would be the people taking decisions and also very much very close to strategy. And then the combination of management with the people responsible for this type of methodology was super useful, very rich, and also helped us indeed to steer, to take decisions about more of this and less of that. Yeah.
So when you're looking at the indicator elements for the monitoring, how do you go about identifying the right indicators? Are you building from an existing framework such as GRI or such as the GIN, the IRIS, etc.? Or do you feel it's more useful to build indicators from the ground up?
That's another topic and quite a heavy one. That also depends again. You want to, with your theory of change, you can see what is it that you want to monitor. And some of these changes, you might not even need indicators. Like in the Watershed program, we used outcome harvesting. That's a methodology you need your theory of change to be able to say, yeah, this is significant or it's not significant, whether a change is significant. But it's not like we intend to see this change happen. Now, has it happened or not? It's more like just looking for relevant change. But if you really want to have, an outcome or an impact with indicators, yeah, then I'm not even sure if I'm the right person to answer this question. I would ask somebody else in my organization, especially if it's about like quantitative indicators, which indicators of course always are. But yes, we do use the standard indicators, the ones that are like the joint monitoring program of the United Nations, for example, on water and sanitation. But and I think that's a very good idea, because those have already been defined well. There's a way in which they're being that the data is being collected, and sometimes you need to think of something yourself and then define it really well with the reference sheets.
And maybe a small addition is that also very often, at least in the sort of the donor-funded sector where we work in, there's often already indicators defined. That, yeah, maybe your program is part of a bigger set of programs, and so the donor wants to, in their turn, also monitor on a higher level. So then you're basically partially stuck with a set of indicators, which often happens, but still, then it's always good to have also, your own indicators that you develop, because it's not just for reporting purposes, right? You want to actually learn from it and use it in your project for improving. So yeah, that's just a small thing I had to think of. Yeah.
Yeah, good addition, Charlotte, because actually that leads to my last question already. In your evaluation process, I mean, I know it's going to be different all the time, but how much of the weight do you put on your learning and evaluation on indicators versus more qualitative or even like macro assessments?
I find that question difficult to answer.
Well, in the way I see it, indicators can also be qualitative. So often the majority is quantitative, is really like numbers. But I see also frameworks that actually want qualitative that qualitative components have been included in a monitoring framework. But yeah, the majority would still be quantitative.
So
Okay.
at impact level, I would totally agree with Charlotte. Although, yeah, there also you need stories and because actually only numbers is never going to tell you everything you want, and only stories also not. The combination of the two is super strong. But like in the case of Watershed, where we did outcome monitoring, it was basically all qualitative. And then we sort of quantified bits of that qualified information, in particular to report to the donor, because they also need to be able to aggregate the harmonized indicator values to be able to say something a bit bigger to Parliament, because the donor is a Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yeah, and that's totally aligned with how it works in impact investing as well. So you have a single company that sits in a portfolio, and you have to aggregate at portfolio level. So it sounds quite similar, actually.
Yeah, and that's perfectly fine as long as it's not a super straitjacket, because it needs to be relevant content-wise in the country or wherever it is. But to have a couple of harmonized indicators for everybody to pick the ones which are relevant, I think that's pretty good practice.
Yeah.
As long as there's space for your own, monitoring. 'Cause that's another thing which is important to mention, which I guess we sort of already said, that the purposes of monitoring, it's not only reporting, of course. That is fine. That's actually the easiest. You need to monitor for your own steering and your own learning, and what works, what doesn't, and why, what can we do better? And if you do that properly, the learning and the steering, if you monitor for that, you have plenty for reporting. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for this. I hope everyone found it as interesting as I did, because this is, like you said, we could have a whole next few chapters on this topic, most definitely. But this was an excellent intro to the theory of change. It's a tricky one. There's a lot of semantics involved that I think we all need to get acquainted with. But you've done an excellent job. So thank you both so much for giving your time and sharing your insights with our members. It's been a lot of fun. So thank you both so much. Yeah.
Thank you for giving
and
us
for the rest of us, we have 3 more Impact from Home meetings this year. So feel free to register. They're on Eventbrite. And we look forward to seeing you next time. And join me, of course, in thanking Anita and Charlotte. So.
Yes, thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for listening
Thank
to
you.
stuff that we like to talk about.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.